I had to go right back to page 1 and to try to tell them things that I felt they'd forgotten during the war. This all hangs together with this whole question that this was the same group of people who had dealt with Hitler, had tried to deal with Hitler at our expense, and never had changed their views about us.
Kennan's Moscow embassy cable became history, an 8,000-word prophecy that the Soviet Union was in the mood to expand across the world and must be contained.
The day that telegram was drafted, I unfortunately or fortunately had the night duty at the code room and was rather perturbed about it because I happened to have a very heavy date that night. There was a dance at one of the other embassies, and I wanted to get out as early as possible. About 6:30 or 7, George comes walking in with this 6-part cable which he wants to send out. And I took a look at it and I said it was nice, but let's not send it out. Let's wait till tomorrow. And I tried to talk him into not sending it. He said, Washington wants it, they're going to get it, and you stay here and do it.
Kennan's telegram alarmed Washington. Days later, its message was reinforced when Churchill arrived in the United States as President Truman's guest.
They began to get to know each other. Our president said to Mr. Churchill, I will be on this trip quite a while, and I would be glad if you would call me Harry. Well, Mr. Churchill said, I'll be glad to if you will call me Winston. Mr. Truman said, I don't believe I can do that. He said, I consider you the first citizen in the world, and I just don't believe I can call you Winston. Winston Churchill said, if you can't call me Winston, then I can't call you Harry. The president said, on that basis, we'll do it. So it went Winston and Harry from that time, and they got on very well.
Churchill was due to speak to a college audience at Fulton in Truman's home state. Privately, he showed Truman what he was going to say. The president, not sure that the American public was ready for an attack on its wartime Soviet ally, let Churchill test the water.
Mr. Churchill, he's one of the great men of the age. He's a great Englishman. He's a great Englishman, but he's half American.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe.
Except in the British Commonwealth and in the United States, where communism is in its infancy, the Communist parties, or fifth columns, constitute a growing challenge and peril to Christian civilization.
Whatever conclusions may be drawn from these facts, in fact they are, this is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build up, nor is it one which contains the essentials of permanent peace.
Immediately after that, Stalin came out with answers to a foreign correspondent's questions in which he compared Churchill to Hitler and decried Churchill's speech as a belligerent call to arms against Soviet Russia.
Since 1945, America had been extending its influence and power all over the world. Stalin grew nervous. He put pressure on Turkey to grant the Soviet Union a military presence in the Dardanelles and the Bosporus. America and Britain feared a threat to the Suez Canal. They were determined to keep Turkey free of Soviet interference. When the Turkish ambassador in Washington died suddenly, Truman used America's biggest battleship, the USS Missouri, to deliver the body to Istanbul.
This was a symbol to Stalin. Don't push us, and don't push Turkey, because if you push Turkey, we'll be there.
Iran, like Turkey, lay on the southern borders of the Soviet Union and for centuries had been hostile to Russia. During the war, Soviet and British troops had occupied Iran to protect their oil supplies. They even celebrated their partnership there. The old Shah, thought to be pro-German, was dethroned and replaced by his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. There was an agreement that once the war was over, the British and Soviet troops would both pull out.
When the occupation was due to end, Stalin didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay on. This created problems. There was lots of pressure put on us, pressure from the British. And in fact, the Soviet Union had no legal right to stay there.
Iran presented the Security Council of the newly founded United Nations with its first crisis.
That's Mr. Gromyko proposing to the Security Council that the hearing of the Persian case should be postponed.
The Soviet Union tried to prevent further discussion. They lost.
Mr. Gromyko and the other Russians then walked out. Their dramatic exit seems to have caused no obvious reaction at the time, though we can imagine what most of those present were thinking. One good thing, however, emerges from this incident. The Security Council had stood its ground.
6 weeks later, Stalin ceremonially withdrew his forces from Iran. But Truman, shaken by his behavior, suspected that Stalin was aiming at world domination.
He said, I want to be in position to document our concern. Go back over the recent agreements and list one by one the violations in which the Soviets have engaged.
I was then Mr. Clifford's assistant, and he turned the task over to me. We talked about it a bit, and I said, well, it seems to me that that's only scratching the surface, a list of agreements broken. There are much more fundamental problems in our relations with the USSR than that. So let's go at it in a somewhat broader way.
We spent weeks on it then, interviewed most of the top officials in the United States.
There was absolute unanimity in all of the agencies concerned as to the nature of problems we had and the kind of response we were going to have to make.
We ended up the report by saying the policy of our country should be set and clearly set. The Soviet Union constitutes a real menace to freedom in this world. Freedom in Europe, freedom in the United States. So we must prepare for it.
The Clifford Elsie report was kept secret. The report concluded that a war with the USSR would be more total, more horrible than anything previously known. The United States still had the monopoly of atomic weapons. At Bikini Atoll in the Pacific, 2 atom bombs were detonated in July 1946. The warning to Stalin was plain.